Rare games tend to be cartoony and over the top. This is reflected with the various series villains, and while most of Rare's catalog of villains are silly and have simple motivations like becoming more beautiful or stealing bananas, that didn't stop them from striking true terror into the hearts of kids everywhere. But something I noticed is the main villains weren't always the scariest. Sometimes that award would go to a specific boss or even random henchmen or goons. So it got me pondering, what are some of the scariest enemies in Rare titles? Obviously, this list can be subjective and based on the person making it, but if you have a scary character, let me know who and why in the comments below. I will be basing this list off of the characters that had a lasting impact on me from my first playthrough till now. This would make it a level of scariness that has withstood the test of time. And in an effort to be thorough with the enemies I cover in this specific video, it'll be all about Rare titles on the Nintendo 64. I'll list enemies from each game I find scary, and then give one enemy the title of scariest of that particular game. Alright, let's talk about the scariest Rare enemies on the N64. Starting with Donkey Kong 64, we have some truly bizarre enemies. First up, the main bad guy himself, King K. Rool. This guy is a real piece of work. He's got a laugh that sounds like a chipmunk on helium, a bloodshot eye, and claws and teeth that look like they belong in a horror movie. But despite his evil plan to blow up the island and that nightmare-inducing game over screen, he didn't scare me enough to avoid fighting him. I mean, his final boss fight is actually super silly. Sure, he's giant, but the way he flails around, it's like watching a toddler throw a tantrum. Okay, maybe his feet are a bit scary. I'm not sure what's growing on those things. It is kind of disgusting. But if we're talking about terrifying enemy encounters, K. Rool does make an appearance in the form of a cardboard cutout. And yes, a cardboard version of himself is arguably scarier than the actual K. Rool. That high-pitched yell when it pops up, it's like a banshee who stubbed its toe. And the stakes are too high with this battle, as you can lose Kongs if you miss hitting the cutout. But other boss fights can be spooky too, like Puff Toss and Dogadon, mostly due to their creepy atmospheres and moody lighting. But the real creepy MVP has to be Mad Jack. We get a cinematic with Tiny Kong, and then Mad Jack pops up laughing menacingly. The fight itself is intense, and I appreciated that you have to use Tiny Kong's hair twirl move to navigate gaps. It's a memorable moment for sure. Now before we dive back into the enemies, let's take a moment to address Wrinkly Kong. That ghostly whale. Whew. Thankfully she's not an enemy, or I'd be out. The level where the Mad Jack boss fight takes place, Frantic Factory, is home to some seriously creepy robo-kremlings. These wind-up bots chase you down while making noises that terrify you. The worst part? You can't kill them. You can only knock them out temporarily. Scary stuff, but they still don't take the crown for the scariest enemy. Next up, we have the giant Kosha, who slams down and creates a rain of falling stalactites that feels like the world's worst game of dodgeball. And let's not forget about the giant Naughty in the stormy area of Jungle Japes. That guy made me pee my pants, not gonna lie. But thankfully he's got the fighting abilities of a giant marshmallow peep. Then there's the Kremling in the minecart swinging a club like it's a baseball bat. Watching that guy barrel towards you, panic central. And the skeleton Kremlings that sound like cracking bones as they chase you, also horrific. But to me, the scariest character in Donkey Kong 64, Kabooms. Now hear me out. I know some of you are rolling your eyes thinking, Kabooms? Really? But you're wrong. These little guys are terrifying. No enemy made my heart race more than the thought of a monster lurking inside a barrel. Barrels are like Donkey Kong's bread and butter, right? They're helpful, they're everywhere, and then bam, one's hiding a kaboom. When it starts chasing you, making that creepy noise, it's like Tag from hell. They've got everything that makes K. Rool scary. Claws, teeth, a creepy voice, plus they come with a side of jump scare. So for me, they take the crown as the scariest enemy in DK64. Hey everyone, Future Jiggy here. As I was going back and watching my edit, I realized I didn't say the Get Out voice, which is terrifying, and I know I'm going to be crucified in the comments. So I just wanted to add in here, yes, the Get Out voice is terrifying, but it wouldn't have made this list anyways because there's no physical character with that. So that's where I stand on that. I just wanted to throw it in there. You don't have to comment below. Now let's talk about our favorite bear and bird duo, Banjo and Kazooie. Banjo-Kazooie wasn't exactly a horror game. After all, some of the enemies are literally vegetables. I mean, come on, how scary can a carrot be? But surprisingly, there were a few characters that instilled a level of horror you wouldn't expect from this colorful world. First up, we have the Gruntlings. These little guys had me jumping out of my fur. Picture this, you're minding your own business in the hub world when suddenly you hear that creepy noise and see these guys charging at you. But hey, I dodged them like a pro. No biggie. Then there are the mutant nippers, lurking under the eerie green light. They gang up on you and try to pinch your cheeks. They aren't super scary, but the fact that there's so many of them and it's in this really interestingly lit area makes me consider them for this list. And how could I forget Slappa, the large mummified hand that reaches out of the ground in Gobi's Valley? This guy had me feeling all kinds of paranoid. It's not just the hand pulling me underground that's scary, it's the existential dread of wondering what the heck is lurking beneath. It must be giant. The gravestones in Mad Monster Mansion were another source of terror. They blended in with the real gravestones, so when one pops up and starts chasing you, I could do little more than panic. And then there are the Teehees, those little ghostly gremlins that not only chase you but can phase through walls. They were particularly terrifying in the hedge maze. I mean, who thought it was a good idea to give enemies ghostly powers? It's a little unfair. At least we have the Wonder Wing. Now let's talk about Gruntilda. Sure, she's scary with her cackling laugh, constant taunts, and that terrifying game over screen. But honestly, she's not as scary when it's all said and done. However, her picture on that wall that you have to fill with Jiggies in her tower, now that's nightmare fuel. Then we have the Grimlets, those little pop-up monsters in Rusty Bucket Bay. They'll attack you if you get too close, making you question every pipe you see. The scariest enemy in Banjo, though? I think we can all agree it has to be Snacker the Shark. You're swimming around in the Treasure Trove Cove, feeling all happy and carefree, and then BAM! Snacker pops up like we're in the new Jaws movie, and that music starts playing. The combination of his menacing presence, taunting style, and the fact that you can never truly defeat him, I'm telling you, he's the reason I'm terrified to go swimming, both in-game and in real life. So in my book, Snacker takes the crown as the scariest character in Banjo-Kazooie. In the sequel, Banjo-Tooie, things take a delightfully dark turn. We got new characters, old characters with new baggage, and a plot that's thicker than Gruntilda's skin. Or lack thereof. That's right, folks, Gruntilda has upgraded from mean green witch to living skeleton with a hateful grudge. She's got revenge on her mind, and with her two sisters, who are just as creepy and as silly as you'd expect, right there to encourage her. As we run around the game, we meet some new nightmarish characters. First up, we have Jingling, our friendly Jinjo King, who suddenly decides to pull a horror movie move and turn into a zombie that attacks us. Because nothing says fun adventure like being chased by a zombified version of your friend, right? And let's not forget the Minjos. Oh, the Minjos. They'll make you question every collectible Jinjo you find, as if I didn't have enough trust issues. And next, we have Canary Mary. Picture this. You stumble upon a disturbing, nightmarish creature trapped in a cave. Naturally, you free her, and she promptly makes your life a living hell. I don't even want to talk about it anymore. The game introduces a delightful array of new enemy types. There's the Dragunda, which is basically a glorified mud monster that will eat you and spit you out. And then there are the Snapdragons, who are not just trying to snack on you, they're trying to send you flying off of a ledge. You thought beehives were a health bonus? Think again. Tooie makes you second guess everything, even the friendly buzzing around you. Is it health or a demonic hive of evil? Now we can't forget the bosses. Oh, the bosses! Klungo steps into the spotlight, and let me tell you, he's not just a sidekick anymore. He's out for blood. Or maybe just to impress his mistress, who left him behind. Then we have bosses like Lord Wu Fok Fok, a giant anglerfish who wants to turn our underwater adventure into a goopy bloody mess. And how about Mr. Patch, the giant inflatable dinosaur? Yeah, he's pretty silly, and for some reason, kind of awesome. Let's not overlook Terry, though, the overprotective father who's so big he makes skyscrapers look like toys. He gives us the old Hawk Tua. And then we meet Weldar, a serpentine-wielding torch that breathes fire and tries to suck you up. Great. And we can't skip over the twin dragons, Chili Billy and Chili Willy. They look scary until you realize they're just two little guys with big attitudes and long necks. Stomponodon, a mini-boss that is literally just a leg, makes you wonder what's attached to it. How giant this character must be. And Old King Cole, one of the easiest boss fights I've ever had. Targetan, not as intimidating as he thinks he is, but bless his heart for trying. But folks, my personal pick for the absolute scariest enemy in Banjo-Tooie, Minji Jongo. This creepy imposter version of Mumbo, they make you think your good old buddy Mumbo has turned on you. His motives have always been in question, with him trying to get with Grunty in the game over screen in the first game. But when he sheds his Mumbo skin and those eyes light up red, that is the single scariest character in this game. Every time I revisit Banjo-Tooie, I find myself asking, wait, which one is the real Mumbo Hut again? Oh, don't mess this up. In the world of Goldeneye, we don't exactly get over-the-top character designs. The game leans more toward a serious and realistic tone, though let's be honest, the weirdly shaped heads are a nod to hardware limitations of the time and kinda silly. It's like they took realism and gave it a quirky twist. But if we take a closer look at these enemies in game, beyond the main cast from the film, you'll notice something interesting. Many of them sport the faces of Rare staff, who were hard at work during development. It's like a secret game of Spot the Developer. While none of these enemies are particularly terrifying, one stands out from the rest, so without diving too deep into the details, I'm going with my gut here. This is the scariest enemy in the game. Perfect Dark stands shoulder to shoulder with Goldeneye, featuring mostly human-looking enemies, but then things take a wild turn with the introduction of aliens. Enter the Skeedar, a rather intimidating alien race that resembles raptors in a way. If you ever crossed paths with one, you'd probably find yourself checking your pants. There's no doubt these characters are intimidating, though personally, I'm a bit more unsettled by how Elvis looks. The stereotypical alien gray look seems more creepy to me than the reptilian look, but that's just me. However, we're looking at enemies, and since Elvis isn't an enemy, the character that truly gave me the chills is Mr. Blonde. The guy is no ordinary foe. He's an undercover Skeedar warrior who uses an advanced hologram projector to disguise himself as a blonde Caucasian man. Dressed in all white and armed with the knowledge of his true identity, Mr. Blonde is a terrifying presence. He's definitely a cut above the rest and easily earns my title for the scariest enemy in Perfect Dark. Jet Force Gemini boasts one of the creepiest atmospheres in gaming, filled with a variety of aliens and some truly spooky moments. The main enemies are these ant-like drones in an assortment of colors. Personally, I never found them all that scary, but let me tell you, those dark magic-infused zombie drones that appear on Tofret? Now that's a different story. I dive into that in my last video, so be sure to check it out. But when it comes to the scariest enemies in the game, I think we have to look at the bosses. Mizar, the big bad of the game, is certainly a frightening figure, though in the end it's revealed he's actually King Jeff's brother Barry, which is a hilarious twist. At first Mizar seems terrifying, but then you see his face inside the giant mechanical bug and it quickly turns into a joke. Classic Rare. Looking at other bosses, we have Lurg, who looks like a slightly off-putting Queen Bee. Can't say I was particularly afraid of this one. It got its comeuppance. As for the Mechanids, probably the hardest boss fight in the game, at least in my opinion. I was ecstatic when I finally managed to beat them. They're a bit spookier, but if you get a good look, they don't deliver too much. The real standout for the scariest enemy? It has to be Fetbub. This terrifying boss on Tofret is a giant scorpion-like creature with enormous eyes. When he charges at you, it sends Juno running for his life. It's a literal nightmare. His size adds another layer of fear, especially with the bats he launches at us. I kind of like to think this is sort of what it would be like if you saw Groudon from Pokemon. I mean, it's one thing to look scary, but to be absolutely giant on top of it, it certainly pushes it over the edge. Racing through to Diddy Kong Racing, we don't have a lot of contenders here simply due to the nature of this game. There are some bosses, but realistically, I think Bubbler the Octopus is the only one who slightly scared me with his voice and intimidating presence. I mean, he just looks mean. The rest of the bosses just aren't scary. Even Smokey, who was a dragon, wasn't too scary. But there are two semi-scary options, both a variation of the main bad. The ghosts in the Haunted Woods track look like disembodied Wizpig heads, very spooky as they fly at you, but they aren't as intimidating as Wizpig himself. His murderous voice, giant presence, and mysterious origins make me say he's gotta be the scariest character in the game. Though if we moved away from enemies, TT and Taj would be up there. I'm just saying. It's really creepy how they come at you. But let's go with Wizpig. Now let's take a little peek at Rare's other kart racer on the N64. Yep, that's right. Rare developed several kart racers across the N64 and Game Boy platforms for Disney. Mickey Mouse is in fact in the Rare universe. Aw man, now I'm gonna have to add him to my Mapping the Rare Universe video. Which, if you're wondering how a vast majority of Rare titles connect together, and you want to get into weird stuff like alternative timelines and interdimensional travel, then that video's for you. I'll link it in the description below. But back to business, there really is only one enemy in the game, and that is the weasels. I mean, I guess you could count Pete, but he's a playable character. I don't know, I'm not going to count him as an enemy. The weasels kidnap poor Pluto and set us off on this racing adventure across the USA looking for him. They may not be too scary, and we never see them aside from postcards where they are torturing Pluto, but nonetheless, in this game, they are the scariest enemy. So add those weasels to the list! Another game where there aren't enemies per se is Blastcore, but there are levels that seem to be like a nod to Pac-Man. They have these bulldozers in different colors that try to smash you as you collect RDUs. They all look the same minus the color, but to have a definitive scariest enemy, I'll go with red, the color of blood. The game is called Bad Fur Day, but who is the baddest in this Fur Day? I'm sorry for that. Another rare platformer with a plethora of villains. Right at the beginning, we meet the Grotesque, a giant gargoyle with an intimidating voice and stature. He can be off-putting, but other characters are far scarier. The main bad himself, the Panther King, is similarly intimidating. Big teeth, big claws, a booming, scary voice. These things make a scary character, but he's not the pick. Professor Von Cripplespeck? Nah, he's really not scary, let's divert. His creation at the end of the game? While it's a bit of a shocker, I never found it too scary. Maybe I was desensitized to reptilian alien things at this point. It's a contender, but I think there's more horrific enemies in this game. The Brute has a similar scariness to Snacker, but you kind of expect it, so it loses that jump scare factor that Snacker has. For some reason, these earthworms kind of spook me, probably because they pop out of the ground and violently shake us. I will say some alternative creations from the Professor are far more scary, like the Teddies for example. While they're teddy bears with weapons, their stitchings and ambushing tactics make them spookier than most enemies. The giant version that is called Reagan, along with Poppet, is particularly scary. It has mechanical legs and weaponry, and the creepy little girl just puts it over the top. But in my opinion, the creepiest variant of Teddies come in the form of surgeons. Something about them medically operating on creatures gives it an even more scary impression. If you saw my last video on when rareware became scareware, you know that I think the zombies from the spooky chapter are the scariest enemy in the game, and particularly the gray squirrel with blonde hair having its eye hanging out. Scary stuff. Add that to the list. And now, rounding out the rare games on N64, Killer Instinct Gold. Since it's a fighting game, technically all the main playable characters will be optional for my subjective scariest character list. Here are my top contenders. Glacius is a creepy blue ice monster. I mean, look at him. He looks like if a Yeti crossed with Spawn. Saberwolf, a freaking werewolf with technology shoved into him. This guy is freaking intimidating, and just saying, if I saw him in the wild, I wouldn't be fighting him, I'd be running. Spinal is a reanimated skeleton of a warrior. Another hard pass if it started running toward me. And glowing red eyes on top of it? Man, I am out. But, in my humble opinion, the scariest character in Killer Instinct? Gargos. Clearly the big bad of the game means business. He is hauntingly scary and maybe not quite as over the top as other characters, but his simplicity and intimidating stature give me the heebie-jeebies, making him the perfect character to round out this list. And there you have it. These are what I dub the scariest enemies from rare games on the N64. Now imagine if I do other consoles and add to this in the future. It's gonna be looking like a Smash Bros. Wall. Well, that's all I have for you. Please drop a like, it really helps spread my content around, and subscribe if you haven't because this tells people, hey, this guy has dope content. Be sure to also check out my other videos, plenty more where this came from. Until next time, have a good one. Jiggylookback!